Go to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12, we're going to begin at verse 1. When you found it, ready back here, Big L? All right, we're on. All right, chapter 12, a lot of different interpretations on this particular chapter. We want to look at it and kind of talk about it here. And you notice in this teaching, John is being shown things that are going on in heaven, and then he'll be shown things that are going on in the earth as well. So it says there appeared a great wonder in heaven. Now he says he saw a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Let's take just a minute. Let's go back to chapter 37. Let's look at a dream that Joseph had. I think you'll see some similarities. I think God was showing him some things to come. Genesis 37 and verse 9. Joseph had been given some dreams, kind of like Daniel and some of the other ones, that the Lord had revealed some things to him through a dream. So Genesis 37 and 9, he dreamed yet another dream, and he told it to his brother, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars, he being the 12 and not knowing it, made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? So in this prophetic part of it right there, I don't think he understood the things that were going to happen and going to come. But who is this woman? There's a lot of different teachings about who the woman is. We've got different religious affiliations who claim the woman is them, and some say it's the Virgin Mary. Some, the Seventh-day Adventists, have a teaching of their own on it. But I think as we read on and understand, I think we understand that this woman can be nobody other than Israel. And it talked about the 12 stars. They represent the 12 tribes. And back over in Revelation 12 and 2, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered. In other words, out of this nation was going to be born a male child, and he, as we read on, was going to be none other than Jesus Christ himself. Verse 3 says, There appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns. We see that description of the beast and so forth as we go on through chapter 13, chapter 17. They have a lot to say about that, and we'll talk more about that when we get over there. But he saw this great red dragon, and verse 4 says, His tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered. Why was he doing that? For to devour her child as soon as it was born. And if you remember how the story goes, the biblical account of when Jesus was born, Herod was satanically driven to go around and kill all the male children in Judea 2 years and under. Satan was just sitting there just like waiting for her to deliver so he could kill the child. And I guess in his mind, he thinks that he could do away with it. You know, when we talk about the cross, when we talk about God's plan of redemption and how Jesus was to die on the cross, I believe that Satan actually felt like if he could have Jesus die, then he could win. I think he danced and he carried on when Jesus died, but he didn't know. He didn't realize that that was just going to be one of the springboards that God was going to use to really touch the world through that. So we know that this is Satan himself through this. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven. We can go back to we can go back to Isaiah chapter 14. Let's go over there and read this right quick, and then we'll. Isaiah 14 gives an account of how I believe Satan fell. There's also an account of this in Ezekiel 28. We will not read that, but you can go on your own time, make yourself a note, and read Ezekiel 28. But Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12, he says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations?" That describes the work of Satan right there to a T. One time he was in heaven. One time he held a high position. We believe that Ezekiel's account, we believe that he was the head music director. I don't know what the terminology correct would be on that, but he had a lot to do with the music. We picture Satan as being somebody with pitchfork and horns and somebody diabolical looking, but the Bible gives a complete different demonstration of him. He gives a illustration of him being very attractive, very smooth and very suave and debonair, kind of like James. But he was not at all like a lot of people like to impersonate and picture him today. But he said he did weaken the nations. 13 says, "For thou hast said in thine heart." That's where it all starts. That's where it all starts with us. Whatever's in the heart, and that's what God looks at, and that's why he looks at it. "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will," you read a lot of "I wills" here. He says, "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." In other words, all the other angels, he will be above those. "I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will," another "I will," "ascend above the heights of the clouds." Another "I will," be like the Most High. Capitalized, meaning God himself. And Isaiah says, "Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." We're going to read about that account before this book is over with. So we know that Satan, that's what he did. And we talked last week, there's about what a deceiver he is. He's the accuser of the brethren. We're gonna look more into that here in just a minute as well. But Satan is attractive, and Satan is extremely cunning, because like I said last week, there's not any dumb angels. And for him to deceive a third of them, to try to rebel against God himself, that took some doing. And if you look at the wiles or the methods of the devil, as Paul says, then you understand what he's talking about. So what happened? Let's read on. Verse 5 says, "She," being Israel, "brought forth a man child." And what about him? It says, "Who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron." That narrows it down completely. "And her child was caught up unto God." That account is in the book of Acts. The two angels were standing there as Jesus was drawn up from the Mount of Olives, and he disappeared into the clouds. And what did the angels tell the ones who were round about? He said, "Why do you stand there gazing and with this stupefied look on your face? Why do you stand there?" It said, "The same Jesus will come back in like manner." And we're told in Zechariah that he will come back to that same spot. Not the rapture, but the second coming. People confuse those two events all the time. The rapture, we go up to him for 7 years, the marriage supper of the Lamb, so forth and so on. The second coming is at the Battle of Armageddon. That's where he actually comes back to earth and puts his foot on the Mount of Olives. It splits by an earthquake, and the Jews recognize him as being their Messiah then. So he will rule the nations with a rod of iron. We'll read more about that in this book. "And her child was caught up unto God into his throne." And verse 6 says, "The woman fled into the wilderness, for she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." You can do the math on that, and you come up with 3.5 years. What is significant about the timing of that? Why the 3.5 years? Exactly. You can go back to the book of Daniel. We studied Daniel. I think it's Daniel 9:27, where it talks about in the midst of the week. You know, Daniel's parable or his vision of the weeks. The 490 years, 483 of those have already been accomplished. All that's remaining is that one 7-year period that Daniel saw. And in the middle of that week, he says the Antichrist will reveal himself. Up until that point, he's going to be a good old boy. He's going to be a friend of Israel. He's going to bring the world together. He's going to solidify all these mistakes that these other political leaders have made, and he's going to do all these things. But in the middle of it, he's going to turn on Israel, and he's going to, as we're told, he will step into the temple. The abomination of desolation Jesus spoke of in Matthew chapter 24 that Daniel described in his writing will take place. That's where Satan will actually enter into the temple and set up himself, and it says he will be as God himself, and he will demand to be worshiped. And that last 3.5 years is what we call the Great Tribulation. And Israel will catch a time called Jacob's trouble. And Jesus described again in Matthew 24 and 25 as a time that would be worse than any time we've ever had before. Now, when you look at the pictures, when you look at the videos of the Holocaust, and you see literal mountains of dead skeletons and people starved to death in these camps, over 6 million of them killed. And he would have killed all of them if God hadn't intervened. For it to be worse than that, it's going to have to be pretty bad. But Jesus said it would be a time that has never been that way before, nor will ever be that bad again. And this is what he's talking about right here. The woman fled into the wilderness. And verse 7 says, there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Now, I thought we just discussed a while ago where Satan had been cast down. Now, this talks like this is a whole different time. Is it or is it not? Don't hear anybody. In the first, okay, he still has access to heaven now. How do we know that Satan has access to heaven tonight? How do we know that? Okay. Yep. And we'll read more about that here in just a minute. But so what has happened is he lost his position. When he rebelled against God, he lost his position as being, he was, in my mind, he was equal with Michael. He was one of those archangels that was very, very, there was no angels above him. Only God was above him. But when he rebelled and he got prideful in his heart, that's where all those eyes came from. We talked about, the old boy in the book of Luke that bountiful crops. I mean, stuff was just bringing forth more, and he knew what to do. He said, I'll just build bigger barns. And I think there's either 11 or 13 eyes and I wills in that story right there. And that's the way Satan became. He became lifted up with pride. So his position was cast down, and he began a campaign against God. But we know from the book of Job, we know that he still has access to heaven today. As we read on right here, that's about to change. So this is going to be a different scenario than when he lost his position in the first place. So Israel was going to be forced by persecution to go, and God has prepared, he has prepared a place for them to go so that they would not be annihilated completely. God still looks out. People ask the question, where was God in the Holocaust? I hear people ask that all the time. They say, well, where was God in the Holocaust? And I always say, if God hadn't have been there, there would have been no lives saved. I believe the forces of evil are super, super strong. I think a lot of things that happen are not God's will. You know, we just assume something happens, it's God's will. Well, it's not God's will that all things happen, because it's not His will that any should perish, but yet those do perish. I believe the forces of evil meet sometimes, and I think they're just a lot of evil. I think it goes beyond our understanding. That's just my interpretation of it. So there was a war up there in heaven, John says, and Michael and his angels fought, and the dragon and his angels. And verse 8 says, they prevailed not, neither was there place found any more in heaven. Now, these last 3.5 years, he's going to be confined to the earth, and that is not going to make him a happy camper. Right now, he's bad enough. He goes back and forth. He can go back and forth. Satan is not omnipresent. God is omnipresent. What does that mean? God can be all places at all times. Satan cannot do that. He has to have angels and demons working under him. I wish I could remember the old boy's name. He was a preacher from Mississippi, and he died and had an afterlife. And he saw this long meeting table, so to speak, with all these demons around the tables, and he heard them talking about things that they were doing on the earth. They were scheming and they were planning. And I can't remember his name tonight, but it's a fascinating story. I don't put a lot of stock into those, because a lot of them are just made up. People want to get publicity in one thing or another. But you can listen to them for a few minutes. I think you can kind of weed out who's who. And I listened to him, and I was pretty convinced he saw a lot of those things. There's a lot of things going on spiritually. There's a spirit world out there that we don't see. A lot of times we just kind of ignore it and play like there's not one. There is a spirit world out there that's battling, and they've been battling since way back before this earth was we don't know how long, since before this earth was formed and man was put on this earth. So let's read on. Verse 9 says, the great dragon was cast out, and it names him specifically, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So hell is coming to earth these last 3.5 years. It's going to be far, far worse than it is right now. And when you take the rapture of the believers out, the Holy Spirit will never totally depart. A lot of people say, well, there won't be any Holy Spirit. I believe the Holy Spirit never departs completely. Why do I believe that? Because you see so many people saved during that tribulation time. They could not do that without the Spirit of God. Now, the Spirit of God, you know, what's withholding, Paul said, that's holding things back right now. When it's taken out, it's Katie bar the door. So it's going to be a time, like Jesus said, like we've never seen before. But his angels were cast out. And verse 10 says, I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation, strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. You see, we don't know anything about that except the two stories that we can talk about. One of them is the story of Job. We're not going to read all that. You're probably familiar with that. There's another one in Scripture that you may not be as familiar with. It's over in Zechariah chapter 3. Zechariah chapter 3 gives an account of how Satan accuses the brethren, and it says day and night, and that includes you and I. That includes us as well. Now, Ezekiel had some 10 different visions that God gave him, and this is one of them in chapter 3 of his. Zechariah had a lot of visions, and this is one of them that he saw right here. Zechariah 3 and verse 1 says, and he showed me Joshua. Now, this is not Joshua the son of Nun, who took Moses' position. This is a priest years and years after that. He showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord. And notice what this says: Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. To resist him. So the priest was there, and Satan was right there to resist him. And the Lord said unto Satan, the Lord rebuke thee, O Satan, even that had chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand or a stick plucked out of the fire? My little granddaughters that were that I call them brands plucked out of the fire, because that's what they were. Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel, signifying that he was a sinful person. Even though he was a priest, even though all these things are said, he was still human and he was still sinful. And he answered and spake unto those that stood before him. To him he said, Behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass, and I will clothe thee with change of raiment. And we won't take time to read all the rest. You can read that right there. But what do we learn from that? And what do we learn from the story of Job about how Satan came with the sons of God? He came with other angels, presented himself before God, and what did he do with Job? Guess we're going to have to go back and study that. He accused him. He told God, he said, if you'll take away all this hedge about him and you'll take all these possessions, he'll curse you to your face. He accused him of not being who he said he was, just like he did that priest a while ago. But what does he say about you and I? And so Zell Bird was sitting just about right there where Shirley was sitting one night during a revival here. It was back late 80s. And Lewis Jeffrey was preaching. You remember that night, Rodney, when she stood up and she kind of gave a little testimony right there. And she said something that I've never forgot. She said, how do I know that Satan and God have not had a conversation about her? See, we don't know that. We don't think about that. But when we stand before the Lord, and we all will, there's going to be only one thing that's going to fight off his accusations, because he'll be right about a whole lot of things he says about us. He'll be right about a whole lot of things. Do you think God doesn't know those things already? God knows everything about all of us. He knows everything about everybody that's ever been born. Thing that'll ward off those accusations, when Jesus said, this one is mine. This one is mine. He's covered with my blood. This one belongs to me. That's the end of that story. You can slice it any way you want to, but that's what it boils down to. And we know that our works are not going to be good enough. And how do we know that? Because again, over in Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus talked about all those people that cast out demons in his name. They did all these miraculous wonders and miracles and things, and did it in his name. And what did he say? Depart from me, because I never knew you. I knew you one time, but you fell away. He says, I never knew you. They were never saved. Judas Iscariot was never saved. He fell right into that same category. He participated along with all the things that the disciples saw and did, but he never accepted it. He was never saved. So this is interesting right here. So we see that he is going to come down to earth, and it's going to be a horrible time. So let's go back to Revelation over here, 12 and 11. These are familiar verses you hear us quote a lot. It says, they overcame him. Who are they? I think some of the ones that Satan accused. And we see all these throngs of people gathered around the throne, whose robes have been washed and made white in the blood of the Lamb. John says they were hundred thousands upon hundred thousands. He he was trying to come up with just an illustration, like there was in East Texas, we call it a buku of them. Not sure what a buku is, but I've always heard a bunch of them. So there was a slew of them. There was a bunch of them right there, and they had all made their robes white by the blood of the Lamb. So they were overcomers. They overcame Satan. They overcame his wiles and his methods. They overcame his accusations before the Lord. And let's read more about them. They overcame him. How did they do it? First of all, it says by the blood of the Lamb, first and foremost, and by the word of their testimony. And third, they loved not their lives unto the death. Now these are the ones who came out of the great tribulation. They gave their lives because, as we'll read on through here, they refused to take the mark of the beast. They refused to worship Satan as God himself. They knew enough about the gospel. They knew enough about what they had heard to know where they were and what was going on, and they gave their lives. See, we don't have to do that today. We don't have to do that. This is the age of grace. We got a free pass. We don't have to lie in here and be executed and have our head cut off to go up to be with the Lord. They did. They had to do that. A lot of them might have starved to death. A lot of them were killed. We don't know. But they overcame Satan. They did it by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. They testified who they were and what was saving them. And they loved not their lives unto the death. He says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. In other words, heaven is rejoicing. John says you can be happy, and that's why God is showing him things that are going on in heaven so you and I will know. You and I would not have any kind of glimpse into that world if God had not revealed that to us. But God revealed those things to us that we might have joy and we might have peace in this world where there is no peace. And as we continue, there's going to be less peace all the time. It's going to be less and less and less. But we can rejoice. Those in heaven rejoice, and we can rejoice knowing what has been revealed to us. But he says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath. Why? Because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. He knows. He knows 3.5 years he's got to gain every soul he can in that 3.5 years. And again, I say to you, I've heard this all of my life, and you have too. Revivals and teachings and preachings, and I've heard people say it all of my life. They said, well, Satan is busy because he knows he's got a short time. And I've always thought, if he knows he's got a short time, then how come we're not busy because we have just as short of a time? He's got the ball and he's driving down the field, and we just kind of like sitting back and watching him. We're kind of watching him like, well, I won't say somebody's defense, but we're making a great stand, in other words. And verse 13 says, when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman, being Israel, which brought forth the man-child. Now, he has persecuted Israel. I've had people ask me, they said, well, why do you think of everything? This is the reason right here. They represent God, and they represent the apple of Jerusalem is called the apple of his eye. And his people, Israel, have always been in a spiritual warfare. They've always been caught in the crossfire between the forces of evil and God himself. And they're really going to come down. I mean, the spotlight is really going to narrow down on the nation of Israel. People were on there. I heard probably 15 different prophecy gurus the other day talking about this. And they asked them the question. They said, do you believe that the peace or the lack of warfare, I guess, in Israel right now is a long-term fulfillment? And every single one of them said it's temporary. Said it's just going to be for a while. And we know that. We know that it's just going to be for a little while. We also know that this is what's going to usher in the tribulation period, is when the Antichrist comes and he brings a false peace to Israel. They're going to sign, I know they've signed the Abraham Accords and they've signed a lot of things, and they're going to sign more. And as you see time go down, you're going to see this happen in a bigger way. You're going to see people call it peace, and they're going to be at ease, and those Arab nations around them are going to be easing off a little bit, and you're going to see a lot of false hope. But right here in the middle of it, in that 3.5-year period, Satan is going to come like never before. So he was going to persecute the woman which brought forth the man child. 14 says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. Now, there have been Bible teachers. Irvin Baxter was one of them. There was a lot of them that say that this will be the United States. He says our emblem is the eagle. So the wings of the great eagle, the United States will somehow militarily or otherwise carry Israel out and protect them. I don't know that that's the case or not. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 19, and I'll tell you why I'm not so sure about that. I'm not denying it, I just don't know. Exodus 19 and verse 4. Let's back up to 3. Exodus 19 and verse 3. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians. We've studied about that Sunday mornings for a while. Notice what this says, how I bear you on eagle's wings. The United States was not around at that time. So we don't know 100% for sure that the United States is the force that carries them out there. God refers to his strength as the eagle's wings. And he said, I brought unto you myself. So I don't know. There's going to be there's going to be someone who's going to help them. We believe that they're going to make a path where they're going to go out through what is modern day Jordan. Because Jordan, if you'll look at the book of Daniel again, you'll see that Jordan is one of those nations at that time which is not in allegiance with the Antichrist. There will be others. There will be nations fighting against the Antichrist. They're not all just going to blend in and follow along with his plan. Now, he will be the superior reigning power, but we believe that there won't all follow him. Let's see if we can read some more of this, and we'll quit tonight. Let's go back over in Revelation. Verse 15, the serpent is cast out of his mouth, water as a flood after the woman. I don't know if that's a literal flood of water, if that's a flood of an army. We don't really know. It says that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And verse 16 says the earth helped the woman. In other words, the ground or the earth itself helped Israel, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So God obviously created some type of an earthquake, and either this water, if it's a literal water of flood that come down to it drained, or if it's an army or persecution, people fighting against them. Y'all remember what happened in the camp of Moses, a long time ago, when the sons of Korah were giving Moses a bad time. God told him, he said, you align them all up here one morning, you get them all together. Moses got them all together, and when he did, it says God opened up the earth, swallowed them, shut it back up. Guess what? They didn't have any more problem. Problem was taken care of. Something similar on a greater scale, I believe, will happen right here. Whatever it is that Satan is trying to destroy Israel with, he's going to intercept that. And the last verse, verse 17, the dragon was wroth. He was very angry with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. In other words, there will always be a remnant. There always has been. Even after being dispersed 2,500 years through all the nations, hundreds of nations, they've been dispersed. There's always been a remnant, and that's where these 9 million came from. There's a remnant that's come back home. And it says, the remnant of her seed which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And we believe in these will be that 144,000. And I'll tell you why once we get on a little bit further. It names them specifically. But they won't be the only ones. There will be many. There will be a large percentage of those people who God will spare. All right, that's a lot of ground we covered right there tonight. I wanted to get through that chapter. We're going to do chapter 13 next week. In chapter 13, if you want to know where this world economic system and all is going, be here next week, because we're going to show you what the Bible says about that. Very interesting when you can